Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar, I'm Jed Morgan, and I just finished Last of Us Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Dark. And I gotta say, we are not off to a good start for this show. It is not as bad as I initially would have expected, but it's still not good by any stretch of the imagination. There were numerous issues with it, no worse than the acting involved. Not a single performance stood out to me, not a single character was developed in any sort of logical manner. It was slow, it was boring, they cut out nearly all the violence of the video game. Adaptation-wise, there are a couple moments where visuals are similar to the games and they steal lines from the games, but they don't take the characters, they don't take the meaning, they don't take the heart of the games, so it's still a poor adaptation, but they do get enough that I can see why people say it's a decent adaptation. It is not a good adaptation, but it is better when compared to the adaptations we've seen of late, specifically with stuff like Rings of Power and The Witcher Blood Origin. It is not as bad as those show, it's still not good, however. But before I get any further, there will be spoilers ahead, so spoiler alert. Much like the basic plotline of the game, the first episode covers Sarah having a nice moment with her dad before the zombie apocalypse happens, then she dies, then Joel somehow meets up with Ellie. That is still the basic plot of this first episode. The problem with all this is it is incredibly slow. It is so slow. Nothing really happens. There's really long takes of them walking forever. I was bored out of my mind through the majority of the episode, and that's probably one of the worst aspects of it, beyond the acting involved. When it comes to acting, the actress who played Sarah is a complete non-entity. They spent the first 30 minutes of the episode developing her character before the zombie apocalypse actually happened, which eventually led to her death, and in those 30 minutes, nothing is accomplished to develop her character. We know nothing more about her as a person than we did at the beginning. In the video game, 30 seconds. That's all it took for the game to develop Sarah to such a degree that the audience fell in love with her, that we knew what type of person she was, her personality, the relationship she had with Joel, everything we needed to know about Sarah. 30 seconds. The TV show could not do the exact same thing with 30 minutes. If you just cut those 30 minutes out and start the show at the same point where the game did, with Sarah giving Joel the watch, you would lose absolutely nothing. So those first 30 minutes are slog, they are awful, they are not interesting, and they don't really even help Joel and Tommy's relationship, which is going to be important later on in the series. It's really just a non-entity, and the acting involved, none of these actors know what an emotion is or what a facial expression is. Even Pedro Pascal, he just goes through the whole thing like, I'm tired, why am I here? Oh no, that's bad. And Sarah, she's just blank-faced wandering from scene to scene like, I guess I'll get you your watch, Daddy. Oh, hi, Tommy. You're my uncle, Tommy. Oh, how nice. None of these people know how to act. Even Gabriel Luna, who was fine enough in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., does nothing in this role. Tess, oh my god, they butchered Tess's character in so much as she's unrecognizable with her video game counterpart. And she's just a bitch. Same thing with Marlene. Marlene's character was made into a severe bitch in this show, which is actually a major problem narratively, partially because in the games it was important that Ellie trusted Marlene. This version of Marlene does not garner any legitimate or logical trust from Ellie. There's no reason they should have a relationship whatsoever. She stakes Ellie in a room and chains her up for weeks. Yes, she has a good reason for it, but is not going to garner that same relationship that was necessary from the games so that Ellie would be like, oh, you, Marlene, the person I trust, told me to trust these two strangers. All right, I will trust them, at least for the time being. We don't get that at all because Marlene is a terrible person. And another aspect later on in the video game, why it's important that we have Marlene as at least a sympathetic character that you can understand, is because of how her character ends up. The shock value of that moment is made so much more poignant because you might even agree with what she's doing. You might actually think she's doing the right thing and like her as a person. This version of Marlene, even though it's played by the same actress, is completely unlikable. And we're going to celebrate at the end of the show when she finally gets her due because she is not a good person. She's not a nice person. It's just not the same character, and so it does damage the story as a result. Overall, they do take a few scenes from the games like I mentioned earlier, and those are the main positives from it. Specifically, the moment where the zombie apocalypse happens and Sarah gets in the truck sequence is the only thing that I can really praise because they take that straight out of the game. They even mention stuff like, oh, that's Jimmy's house. And they really get the visuals right, the claustrophobic nature of being inside the truck from Sarah's perspective. That whole sequence is great. Limited dialogue, except for the weird exposition that Tommy gives in rapid succession about the current state of affairs. That was pretty rough, and the acting is still not good, but from a base standpoint, that was the scene that worked. That was the one that was effective at conveying what was the directors and writers' intentions. It was the only one that did that, and the only game scene that actually translated over in a logical way that actually benefited the show. Other than that, this does not resemble Last of Us at all because the characters do not resemble their game counterparts. Joel, just like I predicted in yesterday's video, is a pathetic man-child who just exists. And it leads to him, since he's not being competent, having to luck his way out of situations. Like at the very end, the one guard that happens to find them at the end of the episode, it also happens to be the one who knows who he is and has been working with him, buying him enough time for Ellie to spring the trap and attack him, saving their lives. It's nonsense. Joel is incompetent. Tess is all great and smart and the mastermind and the leader. She even says that Joel works for her, even though they're partners in the games. And just some weird changes. Ellie's just also a bitch. Ellie, yes, in the game she did swear a lot. Yes, she did yell a lot, but she was still likable. Bella Ramsey is not likable in the role whatsoever, and so I cannot see a believable relationship developing between Joel and Ellie at this point because he's pathetic and she is awful. We're off to a terrible, terrible start from a writing and character standpoint perspective. If it weren't for that truck scene, this episode would be getting a substantially lower evaluation from me because it's not good. Some of the scenes, fine, like, it's just the boring aspect, the writing aspect of it that really destroys the occasional good visual, the occasional referenced dialogue from the games. Another great example of that they take one for one from the game but is totally ineffective in the show is when she gives him the watch. When Sarah gives Joel the watch back before the zombie apocalypse happened, they take it word for word like, drugs, I sell hardcore drugs. He doing the thing with the watch not working to trick her out and make a joke. They steal that one for one, but neither of them know what delivery is. So it's just like, all right, it's not working. It's not working. I sell drugs, hardcore drug. The performances are so bad that even when they have good dialogue and it could have been a good scene, it's butchered by those people involved. And they made some weird changes. I won't mention the changes as much as I would like to in this review, but they made the change so that she didn't buy him the watch. She merely fixed his current broken watch. And it's a small change, relatively speaking, but I think it does damage the importance placed upon the watch after the zombie apocalypse 20 years later, because it's not wholly from Sarah. He'd worn it for a long time. It might have been a gift from somebody else. All she did was pay for a spring to be replaced. That is not the same sort of emotional inference placed on that item as otherwise would have. It's a small detail, but kind of a weird one that I think does damage it overall. Not enough that if it was the sole change from the games that it would be a big deal. It's just an odd one. And because of these poor performances, the boring nature of the first 30 minutes, you're just waiting for it all to end. Get to the action. Get to the action. They cut out all the action. Right after the truck crashes, they cut out like the whole street scene where you get some really frightening shots where you see how the zombie apocalypse is actually affecting individual people, and they cut straight to the end where the soldier kills Sarah. They cut out the violence entirely. There is zero action. The only person who really dies on screen that isn't in the background or far away is the soldier and Sarah and an old lady. That's the only thing that Joel is actually allowed to do in the show that's badass, is kill the old lady and then murder the soldier at the end, and they're not in very heroic manner. This isn't Joel. And the death of Sarah, while it is supposed to be emotional, doesn't come across that way because the actors involved, again, are not doing a very good job selling their emotions, and their characters were not developed in any sort of way. Their relationship doesn't make sense like it did in the games. So it has so much less emotional weight than it should, like it did in the games. And then just a few things to wrap up the episode. With Tess's character, she made a really weird decision after working with this guy who screwed her over just like in the games. She escapes. She tells him, hey, I'm not going to tell Joe what really happened. Just some random people mug her. And she goes with that story when she initially meets Joel, which doesn't make any sense after the explosion that enabled her escape. And then after telling the lie, she immediately is like, oh yeah, those boys, they worked for this guy who screwed us over. Why would she tell the lie just to undo it? And if she did just undo it, why didn't Joel react to it in any sort of way? She just lied to you for no reason and then undid the lie immediately. It's nonsensical from a character writing perspective, nonsensical from an overall story perspective, does nothing but drag out the astronomical hour and 20-minute runtime. This episode should have been 45 minutes at the max because of how much actually happens. It is so slow, it is so boring, and it's not even broken up by good action sequences. One of the last things that I want to mention that is different from the games to the TV show is the getting rid of the spores, like we already knew about, the tendrils. The cordyceps tendrils in application are far worse than I originally predicted after hearing that they were getting rid of the spores. The tendrils are literally just coming out of the zombies' mouths and are flopping around very strangely. It's an odd choice that doesn't really portray anything differently, and it just is a bad design choice that distracts from what should be the few moments of potential action or violence. You're just looking at it and it's like, if you figured to swallow his spaghetti, it looks awful. The tendrils are a bad idea and are not a good change. If it had been a good change from the games to the TV show, I think I would have been able to forgive it. I prefer the spores because that's a very unique aspect of the games, but the tendrils as a replacement is not even close to the same degree of import or cool factor, if nothing else, from the spores. It was a very poor decision. And lastly, the wokeness aspect of it, there wasn't a whole lot of wokeness in there. I really struggled to point any out, beside the occasional line at the very beginning that referenced COVID and referenced that global warming somehow caused the cordyceps to evolve, perpetuating the zombie virus to attack. So they blamed global warming. But it was very, very, very brief. Overall, it wasn't a woke episode. It was just poorly written, poorly acted, with insane changes from the games that gave no benefit to the story, that didn't add anything, and the only good parts were the few moments that they kept from the game, such as the truck scene, where there wasn't a whole lot of acting, that was more environmental input from outside the truck with the claustrophobic camera. When they're not talking, it's almost a good show. But as soon as they open their mouths, as soon as we get these long, boring shots, it becomes a terribly written episode that you just want to end sooner. It's too long, it's too poorly written. I'm not looking forward to the future of the show, but it is still better than a lot of the other crappy shows that we've seen in recent months and years. Overall, I'd probably give this episode a 4 out of 10. And I think I'm stretching a little bit with that, getting a little too positive because of how much I did enjoy that truck scene. The truck scene was really, really good. Other than that, it was awful, and I am not looking forward to the future of this show. It is just too boring and doesn't have anything of note. It's not offensively bad like some of the other stuff, but it is still of no value whatsoever and is a poor adaptation and a poorly written episode overall. But anyway, that's all I have for today. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern day mental illness issues, baby. Book one, Down in Flames. Book two, Apocalypse. Then these are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got book three, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.